Bronson, directed by Nicolas Refn in 2000, is an incredible rendition of Britain's most notoriously violent prisoner, played by Tom Hardy. The film loosely follows the life of Michael Peterson, or Charles Bronson as we have come to know, who has an overwhelming appetite for violence and the unquenchable thirst to become famous.
My name's Charles Bronson, and all my life I've wanted to be famous.
Through formal techniques of film form and narrative, the subtext of this film shows to be about ambition and the ruthless desire to become famous. In this film, Bronson is always searching for a stage on which to be seen, applauded, and heard and understood. He feels like a caged animal and needs to assert his superiority and his strength above all other inmates and guards, becoming the worst of the worst, and in doing so, becoming the best. The events that occur in this film follows Charlie Bronson telling us his story of how he transformed from Peterson to Bronson. His life is cultivated around a lifestyle of violence and theft, and a lack of consequence from his parents while growing up. The audience follows his rise to the top of the ranks, becoming the most violent prisoner in Britain. This film is not a biopic, as it artistically represents his feelings and desires more so than his actual actions, says Charcock 2013. Charles Bronson is merely narrating his life as he wants it to be, says Shaw Williams 2015.
How'd you going, didn't I? Go on, how'd you going?
The form of editing in Bronson uses long durations with an overall slow rhythm to provoke the audience to think. Refn does this so the audience might understand the message and not get lost in the film. It is also used to emphasize the monotony of life both inside and outside of prison. Matthew Newman, the editor, quickened the edits when Bronson was engaged in a fight to mirror his high adrenaline and excitement. During some of the more graphic fight scenes, however, it would cut to black so the violence couldn't be seen but only alluded to. The violence wasn't necessary for the audience to see, but it's important to know it was occurring. Bronson uses a non-linear temporal order through use of the flash forward. The film opened with Bronson in a jail cell, who we assume is monstrous and dangerous. Then jump cuts to different crucial stages of his life, before the audience was taken right back to the start of his life, where a flashback proceeded. The plot finishes with him back in a very small cell, isolated and alone. This use of temporal frequency finally allows us to understand and empathise with the character in the cell. As outlined in film art by Bordwell and Thompson, temporal frequency is used to provide new information. This repetition recontextualises old information. The jump cuts of Bronson's stoic expression lingers to suggest awkwardness and something more below the level of what we're actually seeing as an audience. This again is urging and pleading with us to think about the film and understand him when no one else can. But when important events are shown, Newman used continuity editing for emphasis. Through this temporal use of flashback, we're given his unrestricted knowledge as he reveals the story through his point of view and even provides extra insights into his thoughts through a Brechtian type of theatrical performance. This performance is a metonym for his inner thoughts. He needs an audience. Cinematography was thoroughly used to establish the subtext of ambition and ferocity throughout the film. The shot types alternate between static long shots and panning shots. The static shots offer an insight to the rigid life he was experiencing, and the tight shots were used to produce a feeling of claustrophobia and reinforcing his real and imagined prison he was constantly experiencing. The camera generally stayed at eye level as an attempt to make the audience really connect with his character. The movement of the camera was slow and rigid when he was under the oppression of the system, with flat and dull lighting him, making him look more fake and blend in with the walls even. But when he was fighting, the movements were very fast and mobile to mirror his high adrenaline and the vibrancy he feels during them. And the lighting was highly contrasted to make him look more dangerous and alive. As this film was an artistic representation of Bronson's desires, mise-en-scène was heavily relied upon throughout it. Hardy's performance was important, as his overreactive nature contrasted with the slow and dull-looking behaviour of everybody around him. His desire to stand out was most obvious when he was committed to the mental hospital. The employees recognised the fight in him and tried to oppress that.
This ain't prison. We're line tamers here.
This shows us through Bronson's eyes that abnormal behaviour is treated as a threat to society. They referred to him as a wild animal, then they drugged him and he was temporarily forced to submit, and he reverted back to easily getting lost in the herd of normal population, which was his biggest fear. The attempted murder gives the audience a direct contrast of who he's trying to break free from and who he's literally fighting to be. Colour both inside and outside of prison consisted of monochromatic greens. These were used to reinforce the monotony of the dull life. In scenes where he was fighting, high contrasted reds and blacks were shown to distort his human appearance and aid the audience's viewing of him as a wild caged animal. His costume of his shaved head and moustache perfectly resembled the real Charlie Bronson. But on a character level, he also looked uncannily similar to a ringleader in a circus. This doubles as a metaphor for his position within the prison ranks. He is the leader of all the other prisoners, or clowns, and they all respect him. Inside and outside of jail appeared many vertical lines. They showed the audience how he felt caged, regardless of his environment. This is because he grew up in a small, cramped town, and this explains his indifference to jail. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity to build up a reputation.
I was building an empire.
When he was let out for a few weeks, or when he was in the mental hospital, he rejected both spacious environments because no one knew his name.
And I fucking hate that.
There are other images of temporal frequency revealed throughout the film. For example, every time he fights, he gets naked. Symbolically, he is bearing all and displaying transparency to all his fights. This honesty is of course misunderstood, but he sticks to his morals.
But it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. And I still have my principles.
Bronson's concept of time is an important part of his character. It is brought up frequently throughout the film to exemplify Bronson's disregard of time. Examples of this are littered throughout the film. When he first receives his 7 years of jail, his reaction is blunted, whereas his mother is extremely concerned.
You won't do it for 7. You'll be out in 4.
Towards the end of the film, he robs a jewellery store and tells the store clerk to wait 10 minutes before calling the police. He rethinks his strategy and corrects the wait time to 15 minutes, which still resulted in his prompt arrest.
Don't fucking move! Don't call the police for 10 minutes. Alright. $15 minutes.
Even the clocks on the wall behind him all show different times. This all effectively signifies his disregard of the concept. The sound aided the overall subtext of the film, that he is a caged animal and must become famous. There was a recurring motif of a lion's roar when he fought someone. This upheld the animal inside him, a bold lion of strength, doing what had to be done to get what he wanted. However, it was the diegetic and non-diegetic sounds of applause that he really relished, and that drew him forwards to finally becoming famous, a name that all Britain would know. And that is a subtext of this film, shown through film form and narrative. Thank you.
I am Britain's most violent prisoner.